Welcome to Southwest Minnesota Arts Council's webinar on our fiscal year 2020 art project and art legacy project grants. I am Carolyn Koska, the Financial and Grants Administrator here at SMOC. I'll just do a brief run through of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to learn a little bit about Southwest Minnesota Arts Council, or SMOC. We'll take a look at the guidelines for art projects and art legacy project grants. We're going to go into our application system and look how that all works, and then just go over some general grant writing tips and how the whole process of grants works. I have everyone muted right now. During the presentation, please feel free to type any questions into the chat window. I'll kind of watch that, and we'll also stop a couple places for questions. And then at the end, I will unmute everyone and we can have a little more discussion. So to get started, the Southwest Minnesota Arts Council, or SMOC, is a nonprofit organization committed to promoting and encouraging the development of the arts in the 18 counties of Southwest Minnesota by serving as a source of funds and technical services, which enable local organizations, educational institutions, and individuals to sponsor and/or create and promote the arts in their communities. So you'll see here's our southwest corner, the region that we serve. We're one of 11 regional arts councils in the state. Our funding for this program comes from the state of Minnesota, both through the Arts and Cultural Heritage or Legacy Fund and through the State General Fund. SMOC is committed to supporting arts and arts organizations in creating, producing, and presenting high-quality arts activities, overcoming barriers to accessing high-quality arts activities, instilling the arts into the community and public life, supporting high-quality, age-appropriate arts education for all ages to develop knowledge, skills, and understanding the arts, and supporting events and activities that represent the diverse ethnic and cultural arts traditions of the region. So those are some things to just keep in mind as you're thinking about projects to do, because the projects that we fund need to support these commitments. I'll talk first about the Art Project Grant Program. And this is open to nonprofit organizations and units of government, which would be a city or county in our region, to stimulate and encourage the creation, performance, and appreciation of the arts. Types of projects you can do under this program are music performances, dance performances, community theater or prepackaged theater, and all of these performance type projects can either be put on by community organizations or brought into the community from outside. This can also fund visual arts exhibits, readings by authors, art classes for community members of all ages, public art, arts festivals, and that covers most of what we fund through this program, but there probably are other things you may have ideas for that would also work. Art project grants are available for up to $7,000, and applicants can request up to 80% of their project's cash costs, and then need to provide a 20% cash match toward that project. So for instance, if your project was planned to cost exactly $7,000, you could apply for 80% of that, which would be $5,600, and then you would need to come up with $1,400, that 20% cash match on your own toward the project. Prepackaged theater projects, which is bringing in a group like Missoula or Prairie Fire Children's Theater, that's available for up to $2,500. That type of project is available both in these art project grants for arts organizations or community ed to apply for, and they're also available in our Arts in the Schools program for that type of project taking place at the school during the school year. And just one more note, that applicants that receive operating support from us can't include operating type costs in their budget for other grants like this one. It's pretty common for groups that don't receive operating support from us to say, I'm applying for my grant for my fall season of programming, and this will include 30% of our rent and 30% of our staff salary. So if you're already receiving operating support, you could not include those type of costs in your art project grant. Our Art Legacy project grants are cover the same kinds and types of projects, but they need to be for larger scale projects that will leave an arts legacy in the region. It needs to provide sustainable arts access in the community with a continuing impact over several years, and it really needs to go beyond your organization's regular arts programming. So for instance, if you're a community theater group and you want to put on a show that maybe is just going to cost more than your regular show, and that's kind of the only difference why you would be applying for a legacy project rather than an art project, that wouldn't really be what we're looking to fund. Most of the things that we fund under this program are public art. We've done some communities have brought in place-based productions, which create a play specifically for that community based on their history by interviewing people from the community, and then it's put on by community members themselves, and then they have this play that they can perform anytime on their own. So that's kind of that bigger scale, more impact, and is lasting over more than 1 year. When you're doing a bigger scale project like that for the Art Legacy grant, it's a good idea to first apply for an Art Legacy project planning grant that helps you do all the preparation you need in order to be ready to apply for that full grant. So things that this could pay for instance, if you were doing a public art project, would be gathering input from the community on what do we really want this public art piece to be about, your whole process for getting proposals from artists, because you will need to know who the artist is going to be at the time of applying for the legacy grant. And also things like how much is this going to cost, figuring that out, and what current resources do we even have to do this, or researching some of the sustainability. If we are doing this public art piece, how are we going to maintain it over multiple years? And the applications for these planning grants have an ongoing monthly deadline from August through November and January through April. So the Art Legacy Project grants are available for up to $25,000, or again, 80% of the project's cost with that 20% match. And the planning grants are available for up to $2,500, also with that 20% cash match. Some eligibility items. These listed here are not eligible for SMOC grants. Projects that don't have an art focus, activities of a for-profit project, organization, or business, educational projects within a school system since they have their own separate grant program, requiring artists to pay excessive entry or exhibition fees, activities that take place out of Minnesota. Since we're using state money, they really want all of that to be used within the state. Also not eligible are activities that are not open to the public, activities for the religious socialization of the participants or audience, fundraising events. In other words, the grant should allow your project to break even, not to make money. Payments of debts incurred before the grant begins, and you can't use grant funds to match another SMOC grant. And also ineligible are applicants that have past due final reports from other grants. This is just kind of an overview of some eligibility things, so it's a good idea to check both the guidelines for these specific programs, and then we also have general guidelines that apply to all of our grant programs. And later on here, I'll show you where those are available. You'll need to have a project start date and end date. And your start date is the point at which your project is set in motion. Anything that you're beginning, such as auditions, rehearsals, advertising, any kind of payments, ordering supplies. So none of that can start before your start date. And you can't spend any money towards your project before that start date. If there's something that absolutely has to be paid for before that start date, for instance, if you're bringing in a performing group and you need to put down a deposit on your contract with them, then you can't include that expense in your grant budget. You'd have to cover that on your own. Also important to note, no paid advertising by the applicant can take place before the start date. It's okay to just kind of do a general information post saying, here's when our event is going to be, but no official advertising before that start date. So with all of that, your start date should not be the date of your first activity or event, because that wouldn't give you time to do all of those preparations. Then you'll also need to choose an end date for your project, and that's just when everything has been mostly wrapped up, but you still will have time after that to do your reporting. Our deadlines for this year are starting already July 24th for our first round, and that's for projects starting September 1st or later. So you'll see for each round we have that earliest project start date. So nothing can begin before that date. Our second round in December and our third round March 25th. So it's good to do a little planning to figure out which is the best round for you to apply in based on when you need to start your activities. So for instance, if you're looking at starting something that needs to get going in, say, the end of August for the fall, you'd probably want to apply for that March deadline. Also note that all applications must be submitted by 4:30 p.m. on the deadline date. Our system will not accept any applications after that time. For your grant, you'll need to have 2 people who are attached to that grant, both a project director and an authorizing official. The project director is the person that's most responsible for that project. Oftentimes it's the grant writer as well, but does not have to be. And then the authorizing official would be your president or treasurer or some other individual who has authorizing power for your organization. And these need to be 2 different people. They cannot be the same person. So both the project director and the authorizing official will need to sign the application, the contract, and the final report. If your organization does not have their official 501c3 nonprofit status, or they're not an official unit of government, you need to find an organization that is one of those things to act as your fiscal sponsor. And you'll need to have a signed agreement between you and the fiscal sponsor that spells out your relationship. How are you handling the money between you, and any other sort of rules that you want to set up for that relationship. A representative of that fiscal sponsor organization will need to sign your application contract and final report, and the fiscal sponsor will receive your grant funds, and they are legally responsible for the project. Any questions so far? I will just pause for a couple minutes here if there's anything you want to type into that chat window. I see a question here about the eligibility of reaching out to schools. The question is, using one of our community outreach events to perform for students, can this be part of our legacy project? Yes, that sounds like that would be eligible. It's just that your project can't be taking place primarily in a school for students as part of a curriculum. All right, I'm going to move on for now. If you run into another question, just type it in and I'll be watching that chat box. Taking us over to our website, and I'll point out where we can get into that grant system and just some other resources that we have available for you here. So on our website, you'll see this black grants box and there's a login button. So that's kind of the fastest way if you just want to directly get into that grant system. Otherwise, under our grants, if you go into any of the individual grant pages, there is a login button there as well. It's this Apply Now button, which even if you've already applied, can take you back in to manage your project. So available for you on each of these grant pages, we've got the guidelines. You have the specific guidelines for this grant program, along with the general grant guidelines that apply to all of the programs. We have our application questions that are in an editable document, so you can work on a draft there. Some people prefer to answer all of their questions in that document and then paste them into each of the question fields in the online application when they're ready. You don't need to do that, but that's there if that's how you like to work on your projects. We've got the budget form available, which is also in the application. The criteria that our reviewers will be using when they read your grant, and a video tutorial for the online grant system. Then we've got all of the important dates for each of the rounds for the grant program. And also, if you're interested in doing any other webinars, this is where you can sign up. So I am going to take us into the grant system. And if you have applied for a grant before and already have an account, you can just sign in right there. If you're new, you'll click on the Create an Account, and you'll put together both your applicant information and information for your organization. If you're putting an email address in here, which is your username, make sure that's one that regularly gets checked because you'll be receiving emails about your grant there. If you're ever not sure about, do I have an account? Does somebody in my organization already have an account? Just contact us and we can help you figure that out. So right now I'm just going to log in here under a sample account. If you have already applied for grants before, when you log in, you'll come to your applicant dashboard, and that's where it lists everything that you've been working on. I'll point out this is a new feature that has been added to our system. You can choose to work in a different language. So if you want everything to be in Spanish, you can do that. If you are just logging in for the first time and haven't applied for anything, you'll go directly to this apply screen that has all of our grant programs listed here. And if you want, you can click this preview button to just take a look at the application without actually starting one. Otherwise, if you're ready to get started, you can click the apply button. Another new feature we have this year is this copy previous answers button. And that, if you've applied for a grant before, that'll bring up all of the grants that you have previously filled out, and you can choose copy my answers from a particular application. And it'll copy your answers over for each question that is shared between those two applications. So that a lot of the history of your organization kind of questions will definitely copy over. So as you are getting started here, you'll need a name for your project. And it does not have to be anything fancy, just something so that you know which one this is and we know which one this is. You'll probably want to wait to put in your request amount until you've done your budget form. We have those guidelines available again here, also the Word document with the application questions if that's where you'd like to work. And we also point out that we do have a really big character limit on most of the fields, and please don't feel like you have to come anywhere close to that. We have that there just in case there's something in one of the questions that you really just need to explain a lot, but in general, our grant reviewers really appreciate those concise answers that just kind of get to the point because they are reading a lot of grants at once. Here is the evaluation score sheet again, if you want to refer to that. Another new thing this year that we have highlighted is this collaborate button. If you click on that, you can invite anyone to work on the application with you. So you would just put their email address in there, choose what type of permission you want to give them, and say in the message, please answer the questions about audience numbers. The person that you're inviting does not need to already have an account in the system. It'll just ask them to make a password when they come back in to collaborate on the application. If they want to at another point, they can decide to fill out a full account, but they don't need to have that in order to collaborate. And then just going through the application, you'll need to describe your project, although it reminds you that you'll be asked some more details later. Here's where you put in that start and end date. You'll put any events that are related to the project, and it's important here to make sure you have all of the information, date, time, location, because we use this to post your event on our area arts calendar, which I'll just show you here. So we've got our calendar here full of all of the various art activities going on in the region. And just to note that you do not have to be a grantee in order to get your event posted on there. If you have something going on, please just send that information to us and we will put it on that calendar. Back to the application, you'll be asked questions about your planning for your project, what you're planning to do for your publicity. And then we get to our budget form. It's an Excel document that you will download and save to your computer, fill out, and then upload it again in this spot here. We'll go through the samples that we have here. This first one is for if you are requesting less than the maximum request amount. So these samples just have some instructions and have some already filled out information in there. So you'll enter in all of the expenses here that you have. If you're running out of lines, you can put multiple things on one line as long as you kind of break it down. There's also a budget narrative within the actual application if you have some more information that you want to explain in there. So this will total your cash cost for you. Then you'll start entering your income. If you are selling tickets, if you've got some sponsorships, you can mark here also if it's anticipated funds or if you've already received them. And then right here, it does kind of a double check for you by calculating what your 20% match would be based on your total cost. So this told us that our match would be $11.20. And so before we entered in any cash budgeted, we didn't quite make it to that. So we had to add $95 of organization cash here to reach our minimum match. Then it calculates for you down here again based on your total cost. Your grant request cannot exceed 80% of that. Here that calculation is $44.78 or the max $7,000, whichever is less. And we've got another little double check for you here that takes your cash cost minus your match, and this should be the same as the amount you're requesting. I'm just going to take a look at a question we've got here. And I'm going to save that one for a moment until we finish talking about our budgets. So that was an example if you have a project that's going to cost less than that maximum amount. We also have an example here for if your project costs more than that. It's a little different strategy for figuring out what your match needs to be. So again, you'd enter in all your expenses, and there's your total cash cost, which you see now is more than our limit. You've put in some of your ticket and sponsorships. And here you'll see the minimum cash match it tells us is $27.51, which would leave, as this calculates for the 80%, about $11,000. But since the grant limit is $7,000, we have to make up that difference in the match here. So you would need to add more. And again, you can use this double check field that calculates for you to match what you are allowed to request there. But then when you're ready to actually do the budget, you'll download a blank form here and fill that out. If you are getting any equipment as part of your project or need some sort of construction or installation as part of that, we ask that you give us at least 2 bids for each of those purchases, and you can upload those here. And then you'll enter in some tickets and how many you think you're going to sell during your project. This next section on artistic quality and merit is kind of what's worth the most points throughout your application. So the most important part to have good information in here. You'll list all of the artists and other people that are being involved in your project, and talk about why you chose those artists, or if you chose, we're going to do this play, we're going to do this program of music. How did you decide on that? What were their qualifications that made you pick them? Why this particular production? You'll need resumes of artists and other paid personnel that you can upload in these fields here. And you'll have to provide samples of work for those artists. There's some guidelines here of some limits of what to provide. We've got several large upload fields here for photos or other things that you'd like to upload. You'll probably need to combine multiple images into one file just to fit more than that, because you'll see, for instance, you can do up to 10 images, and maybe if you put 3 in this one and 3 in this one and 4 in this one, but you'll have to combine them each into a file because each box can only have one file uploaded into it. Then we also have places for you to put website links. If there's a performance of your group on YouTube, you can link to that, or linking to artists' websites. It's just important if you're providing any sort of web address to use one of these website fields, because people won't be able to access it in one of the text fields. Next, you've got some questions about the impact that your project is going to have. How is it meeting the needs of your community? How is your organization growing through this project? What kind of support do you have from the community? And this is a good place to talk about if you are having in-kind donations coming to you, because if you look at the budget instructions, you'll see that you need to leave out any in-kind items. Then just some numbers about people participating. Our next section here is reaching the underserved, and this has been just added in this past year. Some of these questions were asked before, but in the last year we kind of combined them all into one section and put a lot more emphasis on them and made them one of our scoring criteria separately. So this first question, you'll need to describe the groups in your community that are underserved or underrepresented. So you just have to kind of look at a little bit of the demographics of your community. And some of these groups might be defined by race or ethnicity, language, socioeconomic level, etc. So you need to kind of think and list the multiple groups in your community that you think are underserved. Then for this next question, you'll need to say, how are you going to reach out to or involve one of those, at least one of those groups specifically in your project? And it gives some examples there of what you can do. Then you'll also need to address ADA access. Do you have an access plan? And how are you going to ensure that this particular project will be accessible to people, and not just physically accessible, but also considering people with vision or hearing disabilities? Back to our budget questions. Sorry, I missed this one a little earlier. There was a question, is including money for a project assistant reasonable with a legacy grant? Yes. Any additional personnel that you need specifically for your project is eligible. All right, our next section is about your evaluation plan or your goals and how you're going to measure whether they have been achieved. This is new this year across the state. We've kind of switched our way of talking about this and answering these questions. So there are several Minnesota arts goals that are statewide, and those are all tied into these state outcomes. So what you'll need to do is read through these outcomes, pick at least one to use as your goal for the project. You can pick more than one, but you need to pick at least one of these. Then for each one that you choose, you'll have to say what skill, knowledge, attitude, behavior, or condition will change as a result of your project related to that outcome, and who will be affected by that change. Then in this next question, you'll have to say how you're going to measure or prove that those changes have actually taken place. And we have here an example of, we've got a sample project, and here are the outcomes they chose, and then who each one would affect, what change they thought would take place, and then how they would measure it. So hopefully that example gives you more of an idea of how to go about this section. You also can upload an evaluation tool that you're planning to use if, for instance, you are using a survey. The reviewers really like to see that, but it is optional. Next section, you'll need to provide some information about the history of your organization, what your organization's role is in the community, your board members, grant history that you have with funders other than SMOC. Then here, if you are not an official government unit like a city or a county, so you'd click no, and then there's some financial information that you need to enter, a beginning balance, total income for your year, total expenses for your year, and then an ending balance. So your ending balance should equal that beginning balance plus the income minus the expenses. And then you can add explanation there if needed. And then we've got just some data gathering, which has no bearing on your application. For each of these, you'll just click the little link here to see the possible codes to enter into. Choose the one that best represents what your organization and project, and just type that in there. And then we've got a section for your contact information. So here's where you put in that project director, an authorizing official, and then if you are using a fiscal sponsor, you'll have that information show up so you can fill in those fields. And here's where you would put in your agreement between your organization and that fiscal sponsor. You'll also need to provide yours or your fiscal sponsor's 501c3 status letter. And then we just ask for some contact information for the grant writer in case we need to contact you. If you are not one of these already listed people, you can stick your information in there. And then finally, we have our signatures. And this is another great place to use that blue collaborate button at the top. You can send this to your board president or your fiscal sponsor person and say, please sign this application. So they'll be able to look through the application and type in their name as their signature. So then when you get down here, we've got our save application button. It does do an auto save, I believe, every 20 minutes, but it's a good idea to just click that button and save as well. Here's our submit button. If you've kind of started an application and you think, oh, this is not the right one, I need to be in a different one, or I'm not ready to do this now, you can click this abandon request, and that will just kind of get rid of that application that you started. For now, we're going to save our application. And you'll see when you do that, it lets you know which questions you have still not answered. In this case, since we didn't fill anything in, they are all listed. And just to also note that it will not let you submit unless you have completed all of the required questions. So we're going to return to our dashboard, and here's our project that we just started. And if you need to get back into edit, there's this edit application right here under your active requests, and then this would have the title of your project on it. If you're awarded a grant and come back in here, this will be the same place where you will find your contract and your final report. Another question, if we are scheduling a November 2019 event, can we use September 1st as a start date to start selling tickets? Yes, you could start selling tickets September 1st, but you could not really be doing much of any advertising before September 1st. You could just say, our event will be this date as your advertising before September 1st. And Marie, I will return to your question, but probably at the end, and I'll talk to you once I take the mute off for everyone. So if you run into any other questions, please type that in that chat box. Otherwise, I'm going to jump back into our slides here. Just some tips for putting together your grant. It's great to start early so you have time to kind of find all those pieces that you're going to need, or contact us to get any questions answered. Make sure to read the guidelines fully. Make sure you're answering all of the parts of each question. As you saw in there, a lot of them have more than one part to them. Another reminder to just keep your answers really clear and concise. And it's a good idea to assume that the people reviewing the grant don't know anything about your organization or your project, because we do have our grant review panelists coming from around the whole region, so they may not know anything about what you do. Always good to have someone proofread your application. Good to check that your start date matches all of those guidelines that we have, and then double checking your budget to make sure that you have the right amount of cash match and the right request amount. All things to check while you are doing your application. We as staff of SMOC are really here to just assist you in your application. We don't have any say in what is funded or not. We're just kind of here as your advocates. So it's a great idea to just call us to talk about your project even before you start an application. Make sure you're on the right track and applying under the right grant program. And you can contact us anytime with questions as you're filling out your application. We can also review it for you before the deadline date. If you let us know, hey, I think I have most of my application together, can you take a look through, and we can let you know if there's something that you're missing, or you should head a little different direction in one of your answers to the questions. So we can do that for sure up to 2 weeks before the deadline, but after that point, we can't guarantee that. And then what happens after you submit your application, our staff reviews it for eligibility and completeness. Just make sure you have everything, and they may contact you for anything that is still missing at that point. And then the applications go to a panel of individuals from the region, and they will score your application in the online system, and then also get together in person to discuss your applications. And that's all based on the criteria for each program, which we'll take a look at in a minute. And then that information, those scores and discussions from the panel goes to the SMOC board, and they will approve funding based on those recommendations. So for the art project and art legacy project grants, these are the criteria that the reviewers are going to be using. The artistic quality and merit of the project is worth 18 points. So like I said before, that is the most important place to have that good information in your application. They give impact on the participants and audience up to 8 points, reaching the underserved 5 points, and your ability to accomplish the project 5 points, and then your outcome evaluation plan for 3 points. And you'll need to pass each of these criteria individually in order to get funded, as well as having an overall score level. If your grant is awarded, you'll complete an online contract within 30 days. And then after you're completing your contract, you'll receive 80% of your grant award before your start date. Then you'll get the remaining 20% after your project is finished and your final report has been approved. You'll need to acknowledge the grant with a credit line that we give you. That'll need to go in your publicity materials. You may also need to use the legacy logo here, depending on the source of funds for your grant. And all of that information, the credit lines and posters to put up and logos, will be sent to you. And it's also available on our website. So then you have to complete an online final report within 60 days after your project end date. It's a good idea to kind of take a look through that final report when you are actually starting your project, so you know which things you'll need to have ready for that, things about attendance and costs, and you'll revisit those goals that you set in the application. Finally, we are available in our office Monday through Friday, 8 to 4:30 p.m., sometimes over the lunch hour, not always. And just feel free to contact us anytime with any questions. Whoops. I am going to unmute everybody now, and we can chat in person in some more specific questions that you might have. Well, if anyone else has a question, please just email us or call us and we can help you with any of those questions. Thanks everybody for joining us today, and have a good rest of your day.